Snow had been falling since noon on December 24, 2024, the kind of thick, deliberate flakes that turned Spokane into a postcard and made every headlight look like a slow-moving comet. Kenneth West eased his 10-year-old silver sedan into the salted driveway of 2247, Cedar Ridge Drive, killed the engine, and sat for a long moment watching his breath fog the windshield. The colonial house glowed from within, warm, golden, expensive. He had paid the down payment on this very house 3 years earlier, $60,000 wired from an account Bradley and Kayla had never thought to question. He adjusted the collar of his wool coat, the same coat he'd worn to Bradley's high school graduation, to his wedding, to the closing table where he'd sold Morrison Construction for $2,800,000, and stepped into the cold. The front door opened before he could knock. Kayla stood there in a burgundy silk dress that probably cost more than Kenneth's monthly rent, her smile bright and practiced, the kind that never quite reached her eyes when she thought no one was looking. "Dad, you made it." She air-kissed his cheek, perfume sharp and floral, the scent of someone who believed presentation was currency. Bradley appeared behind her, loosening his tie, already on his second glass of Cabernet, cheeks flushed with holiday cheer and the subtle arrogance of a man who believed his life was ascending in a straight, unbroken line. Come in, everyone's dying to see you." The chandelier in the dining room caught the light like 1,000 tiny suns, and Kenneth recognized it immediately. He had paid the invoice 3 years ago when Kayla insisted the original fixture looked cheap. 8 guests milled around the table, neighbors, Bradley's co-workers from Morrison Construction, a couple who sold luxury SUVs and never missed a chance to mention it. Mrs. Patterson from next door waved politely, her smile tight. Kenneth hung his coat in the hall closet beside Bradley's old leather jacket, the leather cracked but still smelling faintly of teenage sweat and victory, and followed his son into the warmth. Dinner was served family-style on china that had once belonged to Kayla's mother, prime rib cooked to a perfect medium rare, garlic mashed potatoes whipped with cream and butter, a cranberry relish Kayla bragged had been flown in from a boutique farm in Oregon. Conversation flowed easily at first. Work, the housing market, how Spokane's south side was coming up but still rough around the edges, how interest rates were finally stabilizing. Kenneth ate quietly, nodding when spoken to, passing the gravy when asked, his responses measured and polite. He had spent 30 years in construction, negotiating with contractors who tried to lowball him, bankers who tried to undervalue him, clients who tried to rush him. Silence was a tool. Then he excused himself to the bathroom. The hallway was dim, the radiator hissing like an old man clearing his throat. He closed the door, washed his hands, and paused. Kayla's voice carried clearly through the vent, bright and careless, the way people speak when they believe the subject of their conversation is safely out of earshot. "You should see where Kenneth lives," she was saying, the words landing like champagne corks popping, a tiny one-bedroom apartment on the south side. "Can you imagine? 600 square feet. The carpet's probably older than our marriage." Laughter rippled, nervous from Mrs. Patterson, delighted from the SUV couple, a low chuckle from Bradley that carried the weight of confirmation. "Dad's always been financially practical," he added, almost apologetic, as if practicality were a polite synonym for failure. The phrase landed like a slap wrapped in velvet. Kenneth stood frozen in the doorway when he returned, 8 faces turning toward him in unison. Some smiled politely. Others smirked behind wineglasses. Kayla leaned forward, manicured nails tapping the rim of her china like a conductor about to begin a symphony. "Some people just never learn to plan ahead, you know. Never built anything lasting." Bradley nodded along, confirming to strangers that his father was a charity case, a cautionary tale served alongside the prime rib. The radiator hissed again. Someone coughed. Mrs. Patterson studied her dessert plate with sudden intensity, as if the pecan pie held the secrets of the universe. Kenneth placed his napkin beside his untouched slice, stood slowly, and thanked them for dinner. His voice was calm, The same tone he'd used decades ago when a subcontractor tried to charge him for work that hadn't been done. "Drive safely, everyone. The roads are getting slick." He retrieved his coat from the closet, the same closet where Bradley's letter jacket still hung, and stepped outside. The cold hit like a slap, snow already coating his windshield in a thin white blanket. He sat in the driver's seat for several minutes, letting the engine warm, watching the front window glow with holiday light and holiday laughter. The heater finally kicked in as he pulled onto Stephen Street, hands no longer shaking, replaced by something colder than the December air. He drove past Reed's on doors, colored lights wrapped around porch railings, the comfortable glow of families who weren't performing cruelty for entertainment. At the red light on Division, a young couple hurried across the crosswalk, arms linked against the snow. They reminded him of Bradley and Kayla 5 years ago, when he'd first brought her home before she'd learned to measure people by square footage and credit scores. The light turned green. He passed the Davenport Hotel where their wedding reception had cost him $25,000, where Kayla had complained the ice sculpture wasn't grand enough for the Instagram photos. "Some families just have different priorities," she told her mother, not quite whispering, as if Kenneth weren't standing 10 feet away holding the checkbook. $45,000 for Bradley's college tuition at Gonzaga. $60,000 for this house's down payment. $25,000 for the wedding. Another $15,000 for the honeymoon in Maui. They had never asked where the money came from. They had simply cashed the checks and moved on, assuming their father's modest lifestyle was proof of modest means. His apartment building appeared through the snow, a modest 3-story brick structure with good bones, close enough to downtown for convenience, quiet enough for thinking. He climbed the stairs to 3B, footsteps echoing in the stairwell. Mrs. Chen from 2A had left cookies outside his door again, wrapped in festive paper, a kind gesture from someone who knew nothing about his bank account and still treated him with dignity. Inside, he hung his coat on the simple wooden rack he'd bought at a garage sale for $12. The apartment was exactly what Kayla had described, 600 square feet of practical living. A couch with a slight sag in the middle. A dining table for two that wobbled if you leaned too hard on one side. Bookshelves lined with business journals, biographies of men like Andrew Carnegie and Ray Kroc, and a worn copy of Sun Tzu's The Art of War with margins full of his own notes. Men who understood that true power wasn't about flashing wealth, it was about controlling information, timing, perception. He walked to the window overlooking the city. Spokane spread out below, thousands of lights in thousands of homes where families were probably gathering without turning love into theater. Where sons didn't collaborate in their father's public humiliation. The bank statements were in his bedroom drawer, monthly reminders of what his practical lifestyle had cost him that night. Not money. Respect. Trust. The simple assumption that his own child wouldn't feed him to strangers for amusement. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through contacts. Jim Harrison, his old banker at Washington Trust. Rebecca Walsh, his accountant who still sent birthday cards. Marcus Chen, who'd bought Morrison Construction and still sent Christmas cards with photos of his growing family. People who knew what Kenneth West had actually built in his 64 years. But none of them were family. None of them were supposed to love him regardless of his address or bank balance. He set the phone on the nightstand and changed into comfortable clothes, flannel pants, an old Gonzaga sweatshirt Bradley had given him as a joke sophomore year. Tomorrow was Christmas Day. Bradley and Kayla would probably spend it congratulating themselves on their entertaining dinner party, never wondering if their joke had landed too hard. They thought they knew poor Kenneth West, the man who rented a tiny apartment and lived paycheck to paycheck, who drove a 10-year-old car and bought his furniture secondhand. Tomorrow, he would start learning exactly who Bradley and Kayla West really were. 3 days later, on December 27th, he dialed Jim Harrison at exactly 10:30 a.m. Jim's voice carried the warmth of their 25-year banking relationship, the kind of warmth that came from decades of shared deals and mutual respect. They exchanged pleasantries about grandchildren. Jim's oldest was starting at Stanford in the fall, and Martha's Garden Club, which had apparently won some kind of regional award for their poinsettia display. Then Kenneth steered toward business. I'm concerned about my son's financial situation. Bradley. I wonder if you might have any insights. A pause. Jim had handled Morrison Construction's banking for decades. He understood the weight of family financial discussions. You know I can't give specifics, Kenneth. Privacy regulations and all. Of course. I just want to help if needed, as a father. Another pause. Longer this time. Let's just say concerns have been raised. Recent concerns. Kenneth gripped the phone tighter. Would this be a temporary situation? Hard to say. There are timelines involved. Procedures that need to be followed. What kind of timelines are we discussing? Kenneth, why don't we grab coffee? Corner table on Riverside, say 11:30. Some things are better discussed in person. He arrived early, claiming a booth where conversation wouldn't carry. Jim looked older than his 68 years, retirement having softened his banker's precision into something more grandfatherly, his tie slightly askew, his glasses perched on the end of his nose. Your son and daughter-in-law, he began, glancing around the cafe, they're in a difficult position. Kenneth stirred his coffee methodically. How difficult? Jim lowered his voice. 4 months behind on the mortgage. The bank's been patient, but patience has limits. Kenneth's coffee grew cold as the full picture emerged, not through direct statements, Jim was too careful for that, but through careful implications and strategic silences. Bradley and Kayla had a $420,000 house with $380,000 remaining debt. They'd been missing payments since August. The bank was moving toward foreclosure proceedings. How long do they have? Kenneth asked. 60 days, maybe 90 if they can demonstrate good faith efforts. And if they couldn't? Jim's expression said everything: foreclosure auction, public humiliation, the end of their carefully constructed lifestyle. Kenneth thanked Jim and drove home through downtown Spokane, taking a deliberate detour past Bradley's neighborhood. Their house sat pristine on its corner lot, landscaping immaculate despite the snow, 2 cars in the driveway, a BMW 3 Series and a new Toyota Highlander SUV. Every detail screamed financial success. The disconnect was staggering. They were drowning while maintaining perfect appearances, living a lie so complete they'd convinced themselves it was truth. Back in his apartment, he spread his notes across the dining table. The timeline was clear. Christmas humiliation on December 24th, foreclosure proceedings beginning sometime in March. 2 to 3 months for them to find $15,000 in back payments plus ongoing monthly obligations. Based on what he knew about Bradley's salary, around $85,000 a year, and Kayla's commission-based real estate work, that would be nearly impossible without help. Help they'd never ask for from their financially challenged father. He picked up his pen and wrote Morrison Construction personnel issues on a fresh legal pad. When he'd sold to Marcus Chen 3 years ago, he'd kept most of his management team. Tom Rodriguez was still project director. Sarah Kim still handled client relations. More importantly, they still respected the man who had built the company from nothing, a one-man operation in 1994 with a used pickup and a toolbox, into a $10 million a year firm by 2021. He dialed Tom's direct line. Tom, it's Kenneth. How's the new year shaping up? Tom's voice lit up. Kenneth, man, it's good to hear from you. Year's starting strong. We landed that downtown hotel renovation you pitched before the sale. They talked shop for 10 minutes, the easy rhythm of 2 construction professionals who'd weathered decades of challenging projects together. Then Kenneth shifted gears. How's my son working out for you, Bradley? The pause was subtle but telling. Bradley's finding his rhythm, Tom said carefully. You know how it is with family and business. I hope he's not causing problems. I know how important team dynamics are. Nothing we can't handle, though there have been some expense account questions lately. Small stuff. Kenneth's pen moved across the legal pad automatically. Nothing serious, I hope. Look, Kenneth, why don't we grab lunch? Catch up properly. I'm free Thursday around noon if you want to hit the Onion. Thursday afternoon found them in a private booth at the Onion Bar and Grill, Tom nursing a pale ale while Kenneth stuck to black coffee. The lunch crowd had thinned, giving them space for serious conversation. Bradley's competent, Tom began carefully, knows the technical side, understands project management basics, but he searched for diplomatic phrasing. Entitled, I guess. Acts like the rules don't apply to him. What kind of rules? Expense reports mostly. Claiming personal meals as client entertainment. Using the company card for gas when he wasn't on company business. Small amounts, but it adds up. Tom leaned forward, lowering his voice. The bigger issue is attitude. He talks down to the crew, acts like he's doing us a favor by showing up. Last week, he told Martinez, a 20-year veteran, that his welding technique was probably fine for residential work. Kenneth absorbed this information while Tom continued. We're looking at restructuring some positions in Q1. Market's shifting and we need people who fit the culture Marcus is building. The implication hung in the air. Bradley's job security was already precarious. Kenneth drove home through the gathering dusk, snow beginning to dust his windshield. The pieces were falling into place with almost mathematical precision. Bradley and Kayla were hemorrhaging money they didn't have, living beyond their means while his job performance deteriorated. They'd created their own trap. He just needed to spring it. The irony wasn't lost on him. His son was creating problems at the very company he'd built and sold, giving him the perfect leverage he needed. Not through lies or manipulation, but by amplifying the consequences of choices he'd already made. Back home, he reviewed his notes one final time. Anonymous complaint about expense account discrepancies. Mention of attitude problems affecting crew morale. Nothing false, nothing fabricated, just truth delivered at precisely the right moment to people who could act on it. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to Morrison Construction's main number. He dialed the compliance number from memory, a 24-hour hotline established during his final year as owner when corporate accountability became increasingly important. The phone rang twice before a professional voice answered. Morrison Construction Compliance Line, this is Jennifer. How can I help you? Good evening. I need to report a concern about expense account irregularities. I'll be happy to take your report. Could you provide some details about the nature of your concern? He kept his voice measured, factual. I've observed patterns over several months involving unauthorized personal expenses being charged to company accounts. Can you identify the employee involved? Bradley West, Project Management Division. Jennifer's typing was audible through the phone. What specific irregularities have you observed? Personal meals claimed as client entertainment, gas charges when not on company business. The amounts aren't huge individually, but they accumulate. Do you have specific dates or amounts? He provided details Tom Rodriguez had mentioned, adding observations from his own knowledge of Bradley's habits. Lunch at Anthony's on days he knew Bradley wasn't meeting clients. Gas charges from stations near his house rather than job sites. Are you willing to provide your name for follow-up questions? I prefer to remain anonymous, but I believe this warrants investigation. We take all reports seriously. Is there anything else you'd like to add? The employee has also displayed attitude problems with senior crew members, creates morale issues. Jennifer confirmed the details, assigned a case number, and explained the investigation timeline. 48 to 72 hours for initial review. Full investigation within a week. He hung up and sat in the silence of his apartment. His heart beat steadily. Hands didn't shake. It was done. The coffee maker gurgled in the kitchen, the same sound it made every evening. Outside, snow continued falling past his window, coating the city in clean white that would turn gray by morning. Normal January weather for normal people living normal lives. But Bradley's normal life was about to shift. He wasn't creating lies. Every detail he'd provided was factual based on information Tom had shared and his own observations. The company's investigation would uncover real irregularities because real irregularities existed. He put on his coat and walked to his car. Driving helped him think, and he needed to process what he'd set in motion. The route took him past Morrison Construction's downtown offices. Security lights illuminated the parking lot where he'd walked every morning for 30 years, building something lasting from concrete and steel and human effort. Now his son was dismantling his career there, one unauthorized expense at a time. He continued through their neighborhood. Lights glowed warmly in house windows, families finishing dinner, children doing homework. Bradley and Kayla's house looked particularly inviting. Christmas decorations still twinkling despite the calendar showing January approaching. They had no idea what was coming. Not revenge exactly, justice. Natural consequences for choices they had made repeatedly, consistently, without regard for the people they hurt or mocked. Back home, he spread his legal pad notes across the dining table. Timeline clear. Anonymous tip Monday evening, investigation beginning Tuesday morning, preliminary findings by Thursday, formal disciplinary action by Friday. Meanwhile, their mortgage pressure would continue building. Jim Harrison's 60 to 90-day window was shrinking daily. He reviewed the mathematics of their situation. Without Bradley's income, they'd need approximately $8,000 immediately just to catch up on missed payments. Add monthly expenses, $3,200 mortgage, $800 car payments, $600 insurance, $1,200 in credit card minimums, and they'd need continuous financial support neither of their salaries could provide without drastic cuts. Cuts they'd never consider while maintaining appearances. They'd have to ask for help. The question was whom they'd ask first. Friday afternoon, January 3rd, coffee had gone cold in his cup while he read about construction industry trends and quarterly reports from companies he'd once competed against. The doorbell rang. He wasn't expecting anyone, but he wasn't surprised either. The investigation at Morrison Construction had concluded yesterday. Bradley's suspension would have been implemented this morning. Through the peephole, he saw his son and daughter-in-law standing on his doorstep, both looking strained in ways he'd never seen before. Bradley's usual confident posture had collapsed into something hunched and defensive. Kayla's perfect composure showed cracks around the edges, hair slightly frizzed, lipstick faded. Bradley. Kayla. He opened the door wider. What brings you here? Hey, Dad. Bradley's voice carried exhaustion. Could we come in? We need to talk. He stepped aside, gesturing toward his modest living room. They settled onto the couch while he took his usual chair, noting how they glanced around the apartment, probably remembering their Christmas dinner commentary about his humble accommodations. Dad, something happened at work. Bradley began slowly, as if the words physically hurt. There was an investigation about my expense reports. Kenneth leaned forward with appropriate concern. What kind of investigation? They found discrepancies, personal charges I'd accidentally put on the company card, meals that weren't actually client meetings. It was honest mistakes, Kayla interrupted, her voice tight. But they suspended him without pay. Oh no, Kenneth kept his expression neutral, fatherly. How serious is this? They're treating it like deliberate fraud, Bradley said, running hands through his hair. "I don't understand how they even found these things. Someone must have reported me." Kenneth nodded sympathetically. "These companies have strict policies." "What's the timeline for resolution?" 2 weeks minimum for the formal review process, Kayla answered. "Maybe longer if they decide to involve outside auditors." Bradley shifted uncomfortably. "Dad, we wouldn't normally ask, but we're in a tight spot financially. The mortgage payments have been challenging lately, and now with no income, here it comes. We were wondering," Kayla's pride clearly battled her desperation, "if you might be able to help us out temporarily, just until this work situation gets resolved." "What kind of help?" "Money," Bradley said bluntly. "A loan, maybe $8,000, just to cover the mortgage and basic expenses until I'm back at work." Kenneth sat back in his chair, appearing to consider their request carefully. $8,000. Exactly what Jim Harrison had indicated they needed for their back payments. "That's a significant amount," he said. "We know it's a lot to ask," Kayla added quickly, though her tone suggested she still viewed him as their last, least promising option. "Even part of that would help." He looked between them, noting how their desperation made them forget their Christmas dinner performance. No jokes about his financial limitations now. "Kayla," he said gently, "didn't you mention at Christmas that I couldn't even afford a down payment on a decent place?" Her face flushed crimson. I didn't mean, and Bradley, you said I was financially challenged." "Those were your exact words." Bradley's jaw tightened. "Dad, that's not fair. We're in a crisis here." Kenneth stood slowly, walking to his small kitchen window. "I appreciate that you thought of me, but I'm living on a tight budget myself. Social Security, small savings, barely enough to manage my own expenses." "But surely you have something," Kayla pressed. "Some emergency fund." He turned back to face them. "I wish I could help, but I barely manage my own expenses. You said yourself I was struggling financially." The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications they were only beginning to understand. "Maybe," he suggested kindly, "you should ask someone who has real money, someone who isn't financially challenged." Bradley's face went white. Kayla stared at him as if seeing him clearly for the first time. They left 15 minutes later, their departure marked by stilted politeness and barely controlled desperation. He watched them walk to their car through his window, the BMW's taillights disappearing into the snowy dusk. He folded the newspaper after checking the legal notices, a routine he developed over the past 6 weeks. Nothing yet, but foreclosure announcements typically appeared 30 days before auction dates. 6 weeks had passed since Bradley and Kayla's desperate visit. 6 weeks of strategic patience while their situation deteriorated naturally. Time to check in with Jim Harrison. The drive downtown felt familiar, like returning to an office he'd worked in for decades. Washington Trust Bank occupied the same building where he'd conducted Morrison construction business for 25 years. Some patterns never changed. Jim's assistant ushered him into his office where he greeted him with a sympathetic expression of someone delivering difficult news. "Kenneth, I thought you should know about the auction date." He settled into the chair across from his desk. "Auction? March 18th, courthouse steps 10 a.m. sharp. Your son's property." The words hung in the air like smoke from extinguished candles. 6 weeks of waiting and the timeline was finally crystallizing. "How does that process work exactly?" Jim explained the procedures with professional thoroughness. Registration required by 9 a.m. Certified funds mandatory for serious bidders. Minimum bid starting at $340,000 due to outstanding mortgage balance plus legal costs. If you wanted to help them, Jim added carefully, you'd need to register as a bidder yourself. Family members can participate. Kenneth absorbed this information while maintaining appropriate paternal concern. What exactly does the registration process involve? Proof of funds, valid identification, bidder number assignment. Pretty straightforward if you have the resources. After thanking Jim, he drove to the Spokane County Courthouse. The building stood solid and imposing against the February sky, its steps worn smooth by decades of legal proceedings. In 4 weeks, those steps would host the auction that would complete his son's education in consequences. He walked the perimeter, noting parking availability, sight lines, logistics. Other foreclosure auctions happened monthly. He observed one in progress, studying the crowd dynamics, bidding procedures, winner announcement protocols. Standing where his son's house would be auctioned, he felt the satisfying weight of perfect timing aligning with careful planning. Back home, he opened his laptop and navigated to Washington State's business registration portal. West Point Investments LLC. The name felt appropriate, a nod to his surname while maintaining professional distance from personal motivations. The formation process appeared straightforward: articles of incorporation, registered agent designation, business address, establishment. 2 weeks to complete paperwork, 2 weeks to prepare certified funds and registration materials. He spread his legal pad across the dining table, creating timeline charts and preparation checklists: business bank account opening, certified funds procurement, auction registration procedures, contingency planning for competitive bidding scenarios. 4 weeks to transform from concerned father to legitimate property investor. The mathematics were elegant in their simplicity. Kenneth West couldn't afford to help his struggling son, but West Point Investments LLC could acquire distressed properties at below market value through foreclosure auctions. Perfectly legal, perfectly logical, perfect justice. He reached for his phone to call Attorney Davidson about LLC formation procedures. The next 4 weeks passed with the precision of a well-managed construction project. Week 1, LLC paperwork filed, business address registered to a virtual office downtown, EIN obtained. Week 2, business bank account opened at Washington Trust with Jim Harrison's discreet assistance, $400,000 transferred from Kenneth's personal investment account into certified funds. Week 3, auction registration materials prepared, property disclosure packet studied, foundation issues noted from Morrison Construction's internal files. Week 4, final logistics review, professional attire selected, emotional preparation completed. 48 hours before the auction, he sat in a rental car registered to West Point Investments, watching Bradley and Kayla pack their belongings into cardboard boxes. Bradley emerged from the house carrying a lamp Kenneth had helped them buy 3 years ago. His movements were slow, defeated, like a man going through motions rather than making decisions. Behind him, Kayla directed the placement of boxes into a moving truck with mechanical efficiency. Their neighbor, Mrs. Patterson from Christmas dinner, approached with a casserole dish and sympathetic words. "I'm so sorry this is happening to you both." Kayla's response drifted across the street. "We never thought it would come to this." No, they hadn't. They'd thought their father was financially challenged, incapable of meaningful assistance. They'd thought their expensive lifestyle was sustainable despite mounting debts. They'd thought consequences were for other people. The plan had worked with mathematical precision. At 3 p.m., he drove home to review final preparations. His dining table held everything needed for tomorrow: West Point Investments documentation, certified funds verification, auction registration materials, property information sheets. The business formation had taken exactly 2 weeks as predicted. Fund preparation another week. Final logistics and legal review consumed the 4th week. Perfect timing for a 48-hour completion window. He prepared a simple dinner: spaghetti with marinara from a jar, garlic bread from the freezer, while reviewing auction procedures one final time. Registration opened at 9 a.m. Bidding commenced at 10 a.m. sharp. Professional attire, unremarkable appearance, confident but not aggressive bidding strategy. The property was valued at $420,000. Starting bid of $340,000 reflected the outstanding mortgage balance plus legal costs. With minimal competition likely, most foreclosure auctions attracted few serious bidders. He anticipated acquiring the property for significantly below market value. He selected clothes for tomorrow: business casual, professional but unremarkable, gray slacks, navy blazer, white shirt, no tie. The goal was to blend into the small crowd of investors and curiosity seekers who attended these proceedings. At 8 p.m., he reviewed his emotional preparation, maintain professional demeanor during bidding, show no recognition when Bradley and Kayla inevitably attended their own auction, focus on business objectives rather than personal satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about justice, natural consequences, and the completion of an education that began with Christmas dinner mockery. He set his alarm for 7:30, 2 hours before registration opened, and went to bed with the steady calm of a man who had planned every detail. March 18th dawned clear and sharp, the snow from the night before already melting under a weak spring sun. He straightened his tie in the bathroom mirror, picked up the West Point Investments folder from his dining table. Inside, business registration documents, certified check for $400,000, property information sheets he'd studied until memorization. Everything needed to complete the most important business transaction of his 64 years. The drive to the courthouse took 12 minutes through light morning traffic. He arrived at 8:45, 15 minutes before registration opened, joining a small cluster of people gathered on the steps. 3 others besides himself, a house flipper he recognized from previous auctions, a middle-aged woman who looked like a neighbor, and a younger man in an expensive suit representing some investment group. Minimal competition, exactly as predicted. Registration proceeded smoothly. The court clerk reviewed his West Point Investments documentation with professional efficiency, assigned bidder number 17, and explained the 30-day closing timeline. Certified funds required at closing. Title transfer pending standard inspections. At 10 o'clock sharp, the auctioneer called them to order. Property located at 2247, Cedar Ridge Drive, Spokane, Washington. 4-bedroom, 2.5 bath colonial on 0.3 acres. Minimum bid $340,000 due to outstanding mortgage balance and legal costs. The auctioneer's voice carried across the courthouse steps with practiced authority. "Do I hear $340,000? The house flipper raised his hand immediately. $345. Kenneth called clearly, his voice steady and professional. The neighbor woman shifted nervously but didn't bid. The investment suit checked his phone, shook his head, and stepped back from the group. $350, the flipper countered, though his enthusiasm had noticeably dimmed. Kenneth waited exactly 3 seconds. $355, the flipper studied his clipboard, calculating profit margins against renovation costs. The foundation issues Tom Rodriguez had mentioned during their lunch were documented in the property disclosure. Smart investors knew when to walk away. Any further bids? The auctioneer scanned their small group. Fair warning at $355,000. Silence stretched across the courthouse steps. Spring morning air carried the sound of downtown traffic. Normal people conducting normal business while he acquired his son's house for $15,000 above minimum bid. Sold to West Point Investments for $355,000. The gavel struck the podium with authority and finality. He shook hands with the auctioneer, received preliminary paperwork, and confirmed closing details with the court clerk. A professional transaction completed with the same efficiency he'd brought to construction deals for 30 years. Walking back to his car, he felt the profound satisfaction of a chess game played perfectly from opening to endgame. Every move had led to this moment. Bradley and Kayla losing their house to an investment company they'd never heard of for a price they couldn't have imagined their financially challenged father could afford. The irony was mathematical in its precision. He drove past their house, still technically theirs for 28 more days, noting the moving truck in their driveway, boxes stacked on the front porch. They were already packing, preparing for displacement to some apartment or rental they could actually afford. They didn't know yet who had bought their home. That revelation would come soon enough. The phone rang while he was reading the business section 2 days after the auction. Bradley's name appeared on the caller ID. The first time he'd contacted him since their desperate visit in January. "Dad, I hate to ask, but we really need help with something important." His voice carried the weight of someone running out of options. Pride eroded by months of cascading failures. Kenneth sat down his newspaper and assumed the concerned father tone he'd perfected over the past 3 months. "What's wrong, son? Our house was sold at auction Tuesday. The company that bought it is called West Point Investments. We're trying to find out who owns it, maybe negotiate some kind of arrangement before we have to move out completely." West Point Investments. He savored the moment, his son asking him to help him contact the very company he owned. Seek mercy from the man he'd publicly humiliated at Christmas dinner. West Point Investments, he repeated thoughtfully. That name does sound familiar from business circles. "Really? Do you think you might know someone who works with investment companies? We just need to know who we're dealing with." In the background, he could hear Kayla prompting him with whispered suggestions. They were desperate enough to swallow their pride and ask their financially challenged father for help reaching people with real money. "I might know someone who has information about them," he said carefully. "Let me make some calls and see what I can find out. These investment companies can be hard to track down, but I still have contacts from my construction days." "That would be incredible, Dad. We don't have many options left." He suggested they meet in person to discuss the situation properly. Riverfront Park Pavilion, neutral territory where serious conversations could happen without interruption. They agreed immediately, gratitude evident in Bradley's voice. Driving to the meeting, he reviewed his strategy. Gradual revelation rather than dramatic confrontation. Let them understand slowly who held their future in his hands. Let them comprehend the full scope of their miscalculation about their father's capabilities. They were already waiting when he arrived, sitting at a picnic table with the defeated posture of people who'd exhausted their alternatives. Bradley stood to shake his hand, more respect than he'd shown him in years. "Thanks for meeting us, Dad. We know this is a lot to ask." Kayla managed a grateful smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "We just need to know who owns West Point so we can try to work something out." He sat across from them, noting how desperate circumstances had changed their body language, their tone, their entire approach to him. No mockery now about his modest apartment or financial limitations. "Tell me exactly what you know about this company," he said, pulling out a small notebook as if taking business notes. They explained the auction results, the 30-day timeline, their attempts to research West Point Investments through public records. The company existed legally, but provided no obvious ownership information or contact details. "I might be able to help," he said after appropriate consideration. "Give me a few days to reach out to my contacts. These investment groups often have complex ownership structures, but someone in the business community usually knows someone." The relief on their faces was immediate and profound. "Could you come to dinner at my place Friday evening?" he asked. "I should have information by then and we can discuss your options properly." They accepted eagerly, thanking him repeatedly for taking their situation seriously and offering to help despite their recent tensions. Driving home, he pulled out his calendar to confirm Friday evening was free. He opened the wine as the doorbell rang, the same vintage he'd brought to their Christmas dinner 3 months ago. Through the peephole, he saw Bradley and Kayla standing on his doorstep, both wearing forced smiles that couldn't quite hide their desperation. "Dad, thanks for having us." Bradley's handshake was firmer than usual, respect born from necessity. Behind him, Kayla managed a grateful nod, her usual condescension replaced by cautious hope. "Come in, please." He gestured toward his modest dining table, now set with the good china he rarely used. "I thought we'd have dinner from Clancy's. Their salmon is excellent." The irony wasn't lost on him. Clancy's had catered their Christmas party where he'd been served as entertainment. Tonight, the same food would accompany a very different kind of performance. "Any news about that company?" Kayla asked immediately, unable to contain her anxiety. "Let's eat first," he said, pouring wine into 3 glasses. "Then we'll talk business properly." For 40 minutes, he guided conversation away from West Point Investments, asking about their temporary apartment, a 2-bedroom in a complex near the north side, their job searches, their plans. They answered politely but impatiently, glancing at each other with increasing frequency. Finally, Bradley couldn't wait any longer. "Dad, did you learn anything about West Point? We're running out of time here." He set down his wine glass and regarded them both carefully. "Actually, I did learn quite a bit about West Point Investments." They leaned forward simultaneously, hunger in their eyes. "I found out exactly who owns the company." "Who is it?" Kayla demanded. "Can we contact them? Are they reasonable people?" He folded his napkin slowly, savoring this moment he'd planned for 3 months. "You're looking at him." Silence, confused glances between them. "What do you mean?" Bradley asked. "I am West Point Investments. I bought your house at the auction." The words hung in the air like smoke from blown candles. Bradley's face went white. Kayla's mouth opened without sound. "What?" Bradley's voice was barely a whisper. "How?" "You said you couldn't afford to help us." "I never said I couldn't afford it," he replied calmly. "I said I was living on a tight budget, which I was, by choice." Kayla found her voice. "But we thought you were financially challenged." "Yes, I remember your exact words from Christmas dinner." The color drained from her face as memory supplied the details of that evening. Every cruel joke, every condescending comment, every moment they had used his life as their entertainment. "I don't understand," Bradley said, running hands through his hair. "How did you even know about our problems? The anonymous tip about your expense accounts at Morrison Construction? That was me." His jaw dropped. "You got me suspended. You got yourself suspended by falsifying expense reports. I simply made sure the right people noticed." He stood and walked to his kitchen window, the same view where he had planned this entire sequence of events. "I learned about your mortgage problems from Jim Harrison at the bank. Your work issues from Tom Rodriguez. Both men still respect the business relationships I built over 30 years. Understanding dawned on Kayla's face like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. "You knew everything the whole time. I knew you were living beyond your means while mocking your father's modest lifestyle. I knew you needed help, but were too proud to ask respectfully. I knew you measured family worth by bank account balances." Bradley's voice cracked. "Why? Why would you do this to us?" He turned back to face them, noting how different they looked now, smaller, humbler, finally seeing him clearly. "Because you needed to learn that respect isn't about money. It's about how you treat the people who love you." The silence stretched between them, heavy with 3 months of carefully orchestrated consequences and the weight of family relationships strained to breaking point. "What happens now?" Bradley asked quietly. "I think you need some time to absorb this." The silence stretched for nearly a minute before Bradley spoke, his voice hollow with realization. "Dad, I had no idea you were capable of something like this. We completely underestimated you, Kayla added, her usual sharpness replaced by genuine humility. Everything we said, everything we assumed about you. He settled back into his chair, watching them process the full scope of what had happened. 3 months of believing their father was a charity case, while he orchestrated their financial education with surgical precision. I never wanted to hurt you, he said quietly. I wanted to teach you something important about family and respect. Kayla's eyes glistened. What I said at Christmas about you being poor, that was inexcusable. I was insecure about our own situation and took it out on you. We both treated you terribly, Bradley added, reaching for his wife's hand. You've helped us so many times over the years, college, the wedding, the house down payment, and we repaid you by making you the butt of jokes. He nodded, appreciating their honesty. The money never mattered to me, but watching my own family use me as entertainment, that hurt more than you can imagine. We're sorry, Dad. Truly sorry. Bradley's voice carried the weight of genuine remorse. What do you want from us? How do we make this right? He had been waiting for this question, preparing his answer for weeks. I want a family relationship built on mutual respect, not financial dependence, not obligation, but genuine appreciation for each other. We want that too, Kayla said immediately. But we understand if you can't forgive us right away. He surprised them both by smiling. Actually, I have a proposal. They exchanged nervous glances. You can live in the house for 3 months rent-free. Time to find new jobs, get back on your feet financially, rebuild your lives properly. Bradley's face showed complete shock. Dad, after what we did to you, we don't deserve. Family means giving second chances when people learn and grow, he interrupted. You've both learned something important tonight. Now, I want to see what you do with that knowledge. Kayla began crying. Not the frustrated tears of Christmas dinner, but tears of gratitude and shame mixed together. You're being so generous after we were so cruel. Consider it a delayed wedding gift I should have given you properly. Use these 3 months wisely. Build something sustainable, something you can be proud of. Bradley stood and walked around the table, pulling him into the first genuine embrace they'd shared in years. Thank you, Dad. I promise we'll earn back your respect properly this time. If this story moved you, like, subscribe, and comment your city below. When Kayla joined their awkward family hug, he felt something shift in his chest. The cold anger he'd carried since Christmas finally melting into something warmer. Money doesn't make you poor or rich, he said as they separated. Character does. How you treat people, especially family, that's what matters. We understand now, Bradley said. And we want to do better. Let's have dinner next Sunday, he suggested. And every Sunday after that, real family dinners where we talk and laugh and respect each other. We'd love that, Kayla said, wiping her eyes. And Dad, thank you for not giving up on us. As they prepared to leave, he felt the deep satisfaction that comes not from victory over enemies, but from the restoration of family bonds that had been broken by pride and misunderstanding. He walked them to the door and watched them drive away, noting how they sat closer together in the car, united by shared humility and newfound appreciation for the man they'd never really known. Justice served. Family healing begun. It was enough.